The conversation stopped so abruptly that Ellen's sound engineer thought the audio system had malfunctioned. One moment, Ellen DeGeneres was discussing college applications with a high school guidance counselor, her audience of 300 people enjoying the lighthearted conversation about teenage dreams and future plans. The next moment, complete silence, as a 17-year-old boy in the front row stood up and said 19 words that would change everything. "I'm living my dead best friend's life because his parents need to believe he's still achieving his dreams through me." The studio fell into stunned quiet. Ellen's smile faded as she processed what she'd just heard from this teenager whose words carried the weight of impossible responsibility and devastating loss. It was Tuesday afternoon at the Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank. Ellen's Future Leaders segment was being taped, the set decorated with graduation caps, college pennants, and inspiring quotes about following your dreams. The energy had been exactly what producers expected: hopeful, motivational, filled with stories of young people planning their bright futures. But sitting in the front row, wearing a letterman jacket that seemed slightly too big for his frame, was someone whose presence would transform this ordinary Tuesday into television history. 17-year-old Daniel Martinez was a high school senior, carrying a secret that would stop Ellen's show and create the most emotional moment about grief, identity, and the dangerous ways love can become prison. What Ellen didn't know was that Daniel carried a story that would redefine what it means to honor a friend's memory and reveal how grief can trap the living in the shadow of the dead. Daniel was a thin young man with dark hair and brown eyes that seemed much older than his 17 years. Wearing a varsity jacket with Kevin Harrison embroidered on the chest and a class ring that clearly didn't belong to him, he carried a college application folder and sat with the posture of someone bearing an invisible weight. Around his neck hung 2 friendship bracelets, one red, one blue, that looked handmade and well-worn. The show had progressed normally through its opening segments. Ellen danced through the audience with her characteristic energy, celebrating young people who were preparing for college and chasing their dreams. She interviewed the guidance counselor about helping students find their passion and purpose, creating the kind of inspiring content that made viewers believe in the next generation. During the Future Leaders segment, Ellen had been highlighting high school students with exceptional achievements and ambitious plans. She'd spoken with several teenagers about their college choices, career aspirations, and the dreams that drove them forward. The atmosphere was celebratory and encouraging, honoring young people who were building foundations for successful futures. Then Ellen noticed something that made her pause mid-conversation. While other students in the audience were excitedly discussing their own plans, Daniel was staring at his college applications with an expression of profound conflict, as if the papers contained someone else's dreams rather than his own. "I'm sorry," Ellen said, approaching Daniel's row with the curiosity that had made her beloved by millions. "I couldn't help but notice you seem to be wrestling with some big decisions. What's your name? And tell us about those college applications you're holding." Daniel looked up at Ellen with eyes that carried grief far beyond his years. He held up the folder, and Ellen could see that the applications were filled out in careful handwriting, each one meticulously completed. "I'm Daniel Martinez, and I'm 17, he said, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it. "These are applications to Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, the 3 schools my best friend Kevin wanted to attend before he died of leukemia 8 months ago." The studio began to quiet as audience members sensed they were about to witness something far more complex than typical college planning anxiety. "Daniel, I'm so sorry for your loss," Ellen said gently, settling into this conversation with the patience that had made her America's favorite daytime host. "Can you tell us about Kevin?" Daniel's hands moved to the letterman jacket he was wearing. "Kevin Harrison was my best friend since we were 7 years old. He was brilliant, the kind of genius who made calculus look easy and spoke 3 languages fluently. He was going to be a biomedical engineer, find a cure for cancer, change the world." Ellen felt her chest tighten as she prepared to hear about a promising life cut short. "What happened to Kevin?" "Leukemia," Daniel replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Ironically, the disease he wanted to cure ended up killing him. He spent his junior year in and out of hospitals, but he never stopped talking about his plans for college, his research ideas, his dreams of making breakthrough discoveries." The cameras had instinctively moved closer, understanding they were capturing something profound about friendship, loss, and the burden of carrying someone else's dreams. When Kevin died last January, his parents were devastated, Daniel continued. They had spent 17 years watching their son prepare to change the world, and suddenly all of that potential was just gone. They couldn't cope with the idea that Kevin's dreams would die with him. Ellen reached out and took Daniel's hand. Daniel, what does this have to do with your college applications? Kevin's parents asked me to apply to his dream schools, Daniel said, looking down at the applications in his lap. They said Kevin would have wanted his best friend to carry on his legacy, to pursue the dreams he couldn't. They offered to pay for my entire education if I would major in biomedical engineering and continue Kevin's research plans. The silence in the studio was now complete, as everyone understood they were witnessing a teenager trapped between loyalty and identity. But Daniel, Ellen said carefully, what do you want to study? Daniel's facade began to crack for the first time. I want to be a teacher. I love working with kids, helping them learn and grow. I was planning to apply to state schools for education programs, maybe coach basketball someday. But Kevin's parents, they need to believe that Kevin's dreams are still alive somehow. Ellen felt something profound shift in her understanding of grief and how it can distort love. So you're living Kevin's life instead of your own? I wear his letterman jacket every day because his mom says it makes her feel like he's still going to school, Daniel explained. I take advanced calculus and physics even though I struggle with them, because those were Kevin's favorite subjects. I even changed my senior project to cancer research because that's what Kevin would have done. The camera operators were now completely focused on Daniel, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended typical stories of teenage identity crisis. Last month, Kevin's dad gave me Kevin's class ring. Daniel continued, holding up his hand to show the ring that was clearly too large for his finger. He said it belonged with someone who was going to honor Kevin's memory by achieving everything Kevin couldn't. But Ellen, I feel like I'm disappearing. I don't know who Daniel Martinez is anymore. I only know who Kevin Harrison wanted to be. Ellen stood up slowly, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what this 17-year-old was carrying. Daniel, have you talked to Kevin's parents about how you're feeling? I can't, Daniel replied honestly. They're grieving parents who have found a way to cope with losing their son. How can I tell them that their comfort is destroying me? They look at me and see Kevin's future, and for a few hours, they can pretend their son is still working toward his dreams. That's when Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. She walked to center stage and addressed her production team with an urgency that surprised everyone. Daniel, Ellen announced, I think it's time for an honest conversation about grief, love, and the difference between honoring someone's memory and sacrificing your own life. I need to ask, are Mr. and Mrs. Harrison here today? From the backstage area, a couple in their early 50s emerged, clearly Kevin's parents. They looked at Daniel with expressions of love and hope, but also with the desperate clinging of people who had found their only way to cope with unbearable loss. Daniel, Mrs. Harrison said, approaching him with tears in her eyes, we're so proud of you for carrying on Kevin's legacy. Watching you pursue his dreams is the only thing that's helped us get through this year. Mr. Harrison nodded. You're like a second son to us now, Daniel. Kevin would be so happy to know that his best friend is going to achieve everything he couldn't. Ellen watched this interaction with growing concern, seeing how Kevin's parents' grief had transformed Daniel from a friend into a replacement for their lost child. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, Ellen said gently, I'd like you to hear something. Daniel, tell Kevin's parents what you told me about what you actually want to study in college. Daniel looked between Ellen and Kevin's parents with obvious terror. I can't. They need me to be Kevin. No, Daniel, Ellen said firmly. They need you to be Daniel, because Kevin is gone, and pretending otherwise isn't helping anyone heal. The studio held its breath as Daniel gathered the courage to speak his truth. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I love you both, and I loved Kevin more than a brother. But I'm not Kevin. I want to be a teacher, not an engineer. I hate calculus, and I'm terrible at physics. I want to apply to state schools and work with elementary kids. Mrs. Harrison's face crumpled as the reality of what they had been doing to Daniel became clear. Oh my God, Daniel. We've been forcing you to live Kevin's life instead of your own. "We thought we were honoring Kevin's memory," Mr. Harrison said, tears flowing freely, "but we've been burying you in his grave with him." Ellen, who had remained composed through thousands of emotional moments on her show, found herself openly crying as she watched this family confront the unhealthy ways they had been processing grief. "Daniel," Mrs. Harrison said, removing Kevin's class ring from Daniel's finger. "Kevin wouldn't want this. He loved you for who you were, not for who he wanted to become. We've been so wrong." Ellen made another unprecedented decision. She walked to her desk and wrote out a check. But when she returned to the group, she also carried a small wrapped box. "This is for all of you," Ellen said, handing Mr. Harrison the check for $50,000. "For grief counseling, for Daniel's education in whatever field makes him happy, and for creating a scholarship in Kevin's name for students who actually want to pursue biomedical engineering." But Ellen wasn't finished. She handed Daniel the wrapped box. "This is from Kevin's memory, but it's for Daniel's future." Daniel opened the box to find a simple silver bracelet engraved with words, "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken." Kevin's gift to Daniel. "I had this made based on something Kevin's mother told me he used to say to you," Ellen explained. "Kevin loved you for being Daniel, not for being a backup Kevin." Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out her personal business card. "This has my direct number," she said, pressing it into Daniel's hand. "Because what you've been doing, sacrificing your identity to comfort grieving parents, that's not love. That's a different kind of loss, and it needs to stop today." As the episode concluded, Ellen addressed her audience with words that would be remembered forever. "Today we learned that grief can make us ask impossible things of the people we love." Daniel Martinez was disappearing into the shadow of his dead friend because a grieving family couldn't let go. But honoring someone's memory doesn't mean abandoning your own life. The episode aired exactly as it happened, becoming the most watched segment about complicated grief in television history. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Grief counselors across the country reported increased awareness of how bereavement can create unhealthy patterns of replacement and identity loss. Daniel's story sparked conversations about healthy ways to honor deceased loved ones without sacrificing the living. Mental health professionals began using his case as an example of how grief can create secondary victims when the bereaved transform friends and family members into surrogates for the dead. 3 months after his Ellen appearance, Daniel had enrolled in the education program at State University with a full scholarship funded partly by Ellen's donation and partly by the Kevin Harrison Memorial Scholarship, which the Harrison family had established for students who actually wanted to pursue Kevin's dreams. The Harrison family entered intensive grief counseling and learned to remember Kevin for who he was, rather than using Daniel as a vessel for who Kevin might have become. They remained close to Daniel, but as his surrogate family rather than as parents trying to replace their lost son. 6 months later, Daniel returned to Ellen's show with news that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He was thriving in his education classes and had been selected to student teach at an elementary school where he was already making a difference in children's lives. "I'm finally living my own life," Daniel told Ellen during his return visit, "and I think Kevin would be proud of me for being a great teacher rather than a terrible engineer." Mrs. Harrison also returned to share how grief counseling had helped their family heal. "We learned that keeping Kevin's memory alive doesn't mean keeping Daniel from living his own life. We can love our son's memory and Daniel's future at the same time." Ellen keeps a photo from that day on her desk. Daniel wearing his own clothes for the first time in months, holding college applications for education programs, surrounded by Kevin's parents who were finally seeing him as Daniel rather than as a replacement for their lost son. The letterman jacket that Daniel had worn for 8 months was donated to Kevin's high school, where it hangs in a memorial case alongside a plaque that reads, "Kevin Harrison, remembered for who he was, not for who others became in his place." Today, Daniel Martinez is in his second year of college, studying elementary education and working part-time as a tutor. He speaks at grief counseling centers about the importance of letting friends be themselves rather than vessels for the dreams of the dead. The Harrison family has learned to celebrate both Kevin's memory and Daniel's achievements as separate but equally valuable parts of their extended family. They attend Daniel's student teaching presentations with the same pride they once reserved for Kevin's academic achievements. But now it's pride in Daniel being Daniel, rather than pride in Daniel being Kevin. The friendship bracelets Daniel wore, one red, one blue, now hang in Kevin's memorial garden alongside a third bracelet, green, representing Daniel's own life and dreams. The three bracelets serve as a reminder that friendship means supporting each other's individual paths, not sacrificing one person's identity to preserve another's memory. Because sometimes the greatest way to honor a friend's memory is to live your own life fully rather than trying to live theirs incompletely. Sometimes grief can make us ask impossible things of the people we love, turning them into ghosts of someone else rather than allowing them to be themselves. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who is gone is to let the people who remain be exactly who they are meant to be. Daniel learned that Kevin loved him for being Daniel Martinez, the future teacher who made kids laugh and helped them learn, not for being a substitute Kevin Harrison. And in learning to be himself again, Daniel discovered that the best way to honor his friend's memory was to live the life Kevin had always wanted Daniel to live, his own,